Friends, welcome to the Cold War Prepper. This is Lee. And so we've been asked a long time ago to start doing a set of videos on Civics 101 or U.S. government, if you would. So I've tried to record it several times, and I just don't have enough memory left on my computer, and the programs I have are terrible as far as longer duration videos. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to convert Monday nights to civics and U.S. government and studying that. So hello, everybody. Rhonda from Happy Hickman Homestead. I'm sure John might be with her. Was so happy to meet the two of you. Thank you so much for dropping by, for treating us to lunch, for a wonderful afternoon. And we have got to make it up to your neck of the woods. I know that would be fantastic. Triple G Farms, welcome. Scott Hummer, welcome. John H. Diana too. Gosh, look at all these fantastic people. Triple G Farms. So we did go up to Brownwood last Wednesday, and but I was feeling really bad. I overworked myself, and my poor hip couldn't take it. And we came straight home. I took a shower and went to bed. So I'm sorry I didn't call you for dinner in Lampasas, so we could meet there and have some storms. We're going up again tomorrow, but the way my hip is right now, I've got Helen put some Bengay basically on my hip, and then I've got a Salon Pause on it. I've taken an ibuprofen. I'll probably take a pain pill before I go to bed tonight, but I'm not so sure that we'll have. I will have the capacity to do that on the way home tomorrow night. So, gosh, look at that. And a little lone prepper, Holly Ivans. Wow, all these phenomenal people. Thank you for being here. So what I want to do tonight, I want to start off with, what were they thinking? A lot of times we just kind of say, we take things and we interpret them in today's language, in today's society. And we don't think about what was going on then when they wrote these things, when they said these things, when they had these wonderful concepts, and what did it mean to them? Because that's what we want. We want the essence of what ended up being our phenomenal Constitution. So we're going to start off tonight with the question, what were they thinking? And do a little bit of history and a little bit of philosophy. And then starting next week, what we'll do is we're going to take 10 questions out of the bank of 200 each week for the following 20 weeks. And we'll study those. And these are the bank of 200 questions that you have to study. They give you, I think it's 25 of them for your citizenship test if you come into the United States to be naturalized. So we're going to go through that. So we're all going to learn how to be U.S. citizens based off of those. We'll do 10 a week for the next 20 weeks. Then after that, we'll start getting into municipal, local, and other jurisdictions. Remember that paragraph 4.4, paragraph 4, section 4, let me get my Constitution, make sure I'm halfway correct on this. Article 4, Section 4. Oh, every once in a while, I luck out and I pull the wool out from underneath the rug out from underneath the table, or whatever the saying is. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government. The only kind of government that's mentioned in the entire Constitution is in 4.4, and it says republican. So let's go back, and I want to start off in ancient England. Oh, Lisa Marie, I have no idea. I haven't seen or heard from her either. There's a chance we might hear from Lori tonight. She's doing pretty bad. She's in hospice, and she's been putting out some of her updates as far as how she's feeling. Hopefully she'll be on here too. But, everybody keep her in your prayers. Ungrateful Peasant, welcome. So what do y'all think of my new t-shirt? I got it off of Amazon, National Preparedness Month. So I'm going to wear this up to work on my sister-in-law's estate tomorrow when we drive up to Brownwood. Start off with 997 and what they call the Dooms of Ethelred. So it's the beginning of what we consider English common law. And it reads, there shall be an assembly of every 100, and in that assembly shall go forth the 12 eldest knights and the reeve. Now, reeve is a really old English term. It means the chief magistrate of the area. So basically a mayor or a county judge, if you will. Along with them, and let them swear that they will never knowingly accuse an innocent man nor conceal a guilty man. And then they established what they called the Magnum Concilium, or the Great Council. And it's the basis for the current House of Lords in England. So the House of Lords is the upper chamber in England of their parliament, kind of like our Senate here in the U.S. However, once Henry VIII broke from the Catholic Church and formed the Church of England, there are 26 permanent seats in the House of Lords for bishops and archbishops. So now we have the church having an active role in running the government. So two things happened here with the Magnum Concilium, and that is, number one, all of a sudden, all British subjects had to tithe 10% of their income, basically an income tax, to the Church of England. Every British citizen. The second thing was that there was no splitting of separation of church and state. The church was an active participant in the ruling of the state. And so that's why they had the 26 bishops and archbishops who were put into the Magnum Concilium. Later, that was reinforced in the Magna Carta. And so then in 1215, June 15th, you had the Magna Carta Libertatum, or the Great Charter of Liberty. And it promised the protection of church rights, the protection of the barons from illegal imprisonment, access to swift justice, limitations on feudal payments to the crown, so basically taxation, to be implemented through a council of 25 barons. Pope Innocent III nullified it because neither party ever met the obligations that they swore to. It did implement habeas corpus, which is Latin for the body that you have, or the body you hold, a writ that a person may seek from a court to obtain immediate release from an unlawful confinement, as when the confinement has occurred through a means that violated the person's rights. So this is the first time we see anything like a habeas corpus law, is with the Magna Carta. And then we had the Renaissance, the Great Renaissance in the 15th and 16th centuries, the great period of enlightenment, of art and music, literature, and everything else. Now, what I would like you to remember is during the 14th and 15th centuries, most documents were handwritten. So the Bible, let's take that as an example. The Bible was handwritten by monks. And at this time, all of Europe was still Catholic. That was the only Christian church. So if you wanted a Bible, basically you had these monks sitting down hand transcribing or hand copying the Bible. And it would take them up to a year to write to make a copy of the Bible. So you'll hear these complaints by a lot of people nowadays saying, well, the Catholics used to chain their Bibles down at church. Well, there's two things you have to understand. Number one, it took a year to get that Bible because you had to pay in advance for the monks to write it. And number two, at that time in England, they had less than a 1% literacy rate. So even if you wanted to walk up and flip it open, 99.9% of the population couldn't read what it said anyway. So, and we're going to get into that because it doesn't get a little bit better. I'll give you the literacy rate as of 1776 here later on. But in 1454, 1455, we finally had the invention of the Gutenberg press. And so this allowed them to hand crank, basically, pages of books or Bibles or whatever at a time. The first commercially and non-monk handwritten publication of the Bible, but it was in Latin Vulgate. So in the 15th and 16th centuries, all the Bibles were in Latin. As a matter of fact, almost everything the church did was Latin. Then in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Remember that one? Well, there was also this thing called the Battle of Granada. Now, if you take a look at it, we had the Muslims were taking over North Africa. The Islamic horde later called the Moors, would come up along the Iberian Peninsula, which was Spain, all the way up to the Pyrenees Mountains of France. So for hundreds of years, all of Spain and Portugal was under the occupation of the Moors or the Islamists. So in 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella had the Battle of Granada, and it was the last battle before they finally kicked the Moors out of Spain. So Spain became a Catholic dominated religion in 1492. Up until then, it had been primarily Moor or Islamic. Now, as the Muslims came up the Italian peninsula, there was a lot of fear. This is a nice trivia question you can ask almost anybody. There was a lot of fear that they would make it all the way up to Rome. So they moved the papacy. They moved the Vatican from the Vatican City in Rome to Avignon, France. And so for about 30 years, the papacy was in Avignon. And so they had to have a winery so that they could have wine for the Mass. And they had this, so they went out to the countryside and bought a winery, one of the oldest continuously operated wineries in Europe. And it's called Chateau Neuf de Pape, which means the new palace of the Pope. So it was the papal winery when they evacuated the Vatican and moved up into Avignon. Okay, so we have Ferdinand II and Isabella I in January 2nd, 1492, defeating the final Moorish stronghold in Granada. And at that October 12th of that same year, Columbus discovered North America. In 1499, there was a Moorish rebellion in Spain. And that Moorish rebellion was trying to re-implant the Moors back into Spain. Remember, it's only been 7 years since Spain has kicked the Moors out. Now they are the predominant religion is Catholic, but Isabella and Ferdinand are now the king and queen instead of having a Moorish sultan in charge of Spain. If you ever get the chance to go to Spain, visit the Alhambra, one of the most beautiful mosques that has ever been built. But the Alhambra is in Spain. So 1499, because of that revolution, Ferdinand and Isabella said that they wanted to get rid of all the Moors. They had given them freedom. They could stay if they promised not to try to take over. They broke that promise. They tried to take over the government again, tried to have a revolution. So we had this thing called the Spanish Inquisition. So the Spanish Inquisition was run by the Spanish royalty, not by the church. There was one monk who sat in on the trials, but was not an active part of it. So the Spanish Inquisitions was Ferdinand and Isabella trying to get rid of all the Moors who had rebelled against them once they finally conquered them and kicked them out of Spain, those few who remained. At the same time, they said, you know what, we might as well get rid of the Jews too. So the Spanish Inquisition was basically getting rid of Jews and Moors out of Spain. Then just 8 years after that, Martin Luther began his protest, or the Protestant Revolution in Wittenberg, Germany, Wittenberg. And so he broke from the Roman Catholic Church and created what he called Lutheranism. And then John Calvin, John Wesley Wyatt, or Wesleyanism, and a lot of other Protestant religions started coming up after Luther separated from the church. Now, why is this significant? We're going to have several Protestant physical war actions against the Catholics for the ensuing 100 years, okay? And so now we're seeing that in 1517, we're getting that division, okay? So now all of a sudden things that are Catholic are bad. And so the Protestants want to totally break from that. Well, the Bible is in Latin Vulgate, which is Catholic. So what they decide they want to do is they want to translate that. So later on in 1557, they'll translate it into English as the Geneva Bible. In 1530, Henry VIII broke from the Catholic Church because the Catholic Church refused to give him his 8th divorce. He formed the Church of England. We found out about that earlier with the Magna Carta and things like that. that would later have a part to do with that. And we've got the establishment of the Church of England. In 1553, one of his grandchildren, Mary, who was Catholic, attempted to restore Catholicism to England, and it began the War of the Roses. She ended up being killed in Scotland. And, we had this Protestant Catholic conflict going on by the Protestants trying to kick all the Catholics out of England from then on. And so we had the Geneva Bible from 1557 until this guy comes along by the name of King James. Now, King James had a problem with the Bible, and because the Bible denounced kings, didn't like kings. They wanted people to be free and only have one king on earth and, follow the king in heaven. So King James said that he's going to have it retranslated into English. And so he told his translators, I want you to do a couple things. I want you to retranslate the Bible, but I want you to exclude any references to royalty being bad. Okay. And so he did a couple other things. So the King James Bible was a retranslation of the original documents, but slightly more lenient towards aristocracy and slightly more lenient towards royalty than was the original Geneva Bible. Now, the Geneva Bible is probably the one, well, we know it was the one. The Geneva Bible was found on the, it was used by William Shakespeare. It was used by Oliver Cromwell, Scotsman, John Knox, John Donne. It was one of the Bibles that was found. It was the Geneva Bible was the Bible that was found on the Mayflower. And you can see that at the Mayflower Museum. And it was used by many English dissenters. It's still respected by Oliver Cromwell's soldiers at the time of the English Civil War. And a booklet based on it, the Soldier's Pocket Bible, was all based off of the Geneva Bible. So in 1558, Virginia became queen and restored the Anglican Church and the Book of Common Prayers. Now, when King James assumed in 1599, he redid the Book of Common Prayers. And of course, he had the King James Bible retranslated. So let me see what he said. I got notes here. He felt strongly that many of the annotations were partial, untrue, seditious, and savoring too much of dangerous and traitorous conceits. In all likelihood, the Geneva's interpretations of some biblical passages were anti-clerical republicanism, which could imply church hierarchy was unnecessary. Other passages appeared particularly seditious, notably references to monarchs as tyrants. Then in 1604, he rewrote the English Book of Common Prayer. In 1606, in December, the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery left Blackwall, England, to the James River estuary in Virginia and founded Jamestown. And they had a Geneva Bible with them then. The primary reason that people at this time were coming to North America, hello, Texas Redleg, welcome. Butch Graves, welcome. Christina Green, welcome. The primary reason that people were coming to North America was commerce, was to start a business, to start a trade, to own land. See, if you owned land in England, that made you a lord. And whereas the vast majority of land was owned by either the crown or the lords, and then very little of it was owned by the fiefdom, the common man. So if you had an opportunity to get on board a ship and come to North America and acquire land, then you became basically a lord, a landholder. Simultaneous with that, 1609, the Dutch New Netherlands company settled along the Hudson and Delaware rivers and founded New Amsterdam. About 60 years later, that would be renamed to New York in honor of the British who then occupied it. 1609 to 1610 were the starving times in Jamestown and the people passed away. 1612, tobacco was established as a cash crop, leaving the U.S., supporting the colonists, and then being exported to Europe. Believe it or not, people didn't start smoking until around 1612. And that was when tobacco began being exported. Tobacco is a very labor-intensive crop. So they needed people as laborers. So they would pay to have people come over to work the tobacco fields. And those people would have, in exchange for free transport on the ship to go to Virginia and the Carolinas to work in the tobacco fields, they had 7 years of indentured servitude. They would come work for 7 years, basically as a slave. Then at the end of that 7 years, they would be free and they could go seek their own land and become a landholder themselves. In 1619, the House of Burgesses, which was the colonial version of the House of Commons, was established in Virginia. So it's kind of representative democracy. So direct democracy was established simultaneous with that in Massachusetts. So in Massachusetts, if you were a male, an adult male, who owned land and attended church regularly, you were allowed to have a vote in the Massachusetts House of Commons. On the other hand, down in Virginia, just all able-bodied males were able to vote for a representative to go to the House of Burgesses to represent them in that government. So the two different colonies had different forms of government, one of them being a pure democracy, the other one being a form of republicanism or representative democracy. In 1620, a group of Protestants rebelled against the Church of England, and they were called Pilgrims, and left aboard the Mayflower, headed for the Jamestown, and instead landed up at Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts. In 1631, King Charles I granted a charter for a purely Catholic entity, a colony. He was basically exporting all of the remaining Catholics from England to this new place, and it was named after the mother of Christ, Mary, or Maryland. And so that's what gave the charter for Maryland to exist. Then in 1636, Roger Williams from Boston, Massachusetts, wanted extreme separation from the Church of England. He didn't want to tithe to them. He didn't want to have anything to do with them. And so his Puritans were too strict. He was banished from Boston and founded what is now called Providence, Rhode Island. In 1637, Anne Hutchinson wanted equality and rights of women, and she formed Rhode Island, Portsmouth, Rhode Island. So Rhode Island was based upon equal rights for women. In 1651, Thomas Hobbes wrote Leviathan, which was a social contract theory. Now, this becomes one of the key principles, philosophical principles that's going to be embedded in our Constitution. So it said that all individuals are free and equal by God's natural right. And he was heavily influenced by the Protestant Catholic conflict in England. He contended that man's natural state is a state of war or a state of conflict or a state of disagreement, and that you needed to have a very strong government to suppress man and his desires to fight with his fellow men. So we had to restrain the natural tendency of men to fight with each other via government. Without government, life will be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So in 1681, King Charles II gave William Penn a plot of land called Penn's Woods in what is present-day Delaware. And then later that was expanded and formed into Pennsylvania. In 1689, John Locke, the second of these two philosophers, had introduced his second treatise on civil government and his 1690 essay on concerning human understanding. He denied the rights of kings to govern and argued that all men are equal and with natural rights that no monarch ever has the power to void. The consent of the people is necessary for anyone to rule. He believed that the lawmakers and the law enforcers or law interpreters had to be separate bodies. So see, now we're getting this division of responsibilities. You got the lawmakers, you've got the law enforcers, and then you've got the law interpreters. So basically legislative, executive, and judicial branches were the idea originally of John Locke in 1690. The consent of the people is necessary for anyone to rule. He believed that let me see, the Thomas Jefferson would take on John Locke's ideas to a T. Okay, and his original writings, where he wrote the Constitution basically for the state of Virginia, said life, liberty, and the right to own property. And later, that was when we made it into the U.S. Constitution, the right to own property became the life to liberty, or right to liberty. In 1718, New Orleans was founded by the French. And so we had a different type of law that was established. We had French royal law in New Orleans, while on the East Coast, we had basically direct representation as far as pure democracy in Boston. In Virginia, we had representative democracy or republicanism. So now we've got three different kinds of clashing ideologies as far as how should we have a government formed. So in 1749, a Frenchman by the name of Charles Louis, the second Baron of Montesquieu, wrote The Spirit of the Laws, and he defined liberty and promoted the idea of governmental checks and balances. So now we've got John Locke being expanded, and Montesquieu is saying, wait a minute, not only do they have separate roles, but they should be able to negate each other if one of those entities does something bad. So that's where we came up with the entire idea of checks and balances. So now we've got French law coming into the British law. And so we're having a merging of these two philosophies, John Locke and Montesquieu. And then from 1754 to 1763, probably one of the most important periods as far as what we consider to be the birth of the United States. And this is going to be, in North America, we call it the French and Indian War. In Europe, they call it the 7 Years' War. So it's primarily the English fighting the French. And so, you've got The Last of the Mohicans is written about the French and Indian Wars. You've got all the stuff that's going on. Aaron Burr, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, all these different people are members of the militia. They are commissioned by the King George, to be an officer in the British Army. And so they are basically colonels, captains, generals in the British Army. And but they are militiamen with commissions to lead men in battle against the French and against the Indians who were aligned with the French. Once that war is over, it's a very expensive war. All of these colonists got to keep their titles and their ranks and their swords and their guns. And so they had their rifles, and they had, of course, which was basically they had their own rifles to start with. And they got to keep their cannons. Now, that's going to be an extremely important thing here in just a couple more years. So in 1765, King George decides we're going bankrupt. We've got to recoup all the money we spent as far as the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian Wars. So we're going to put out this thing called the Stamp Act. And the Stamp Act basically was very heavily taxing the colonists because a lot of the British royal money went to the colonies to fight the French in northeastern or New England area. And so they wanted, the king wanted some of his investment back. Well, that did not sit too well with the colonists. They did not like the fact that they were being taxed, and they had nobody representing them either in the House of Commons nor in the House of Lords. So they started this whole thing. Remember, now we've got the Gutenberg press. Now we got the printing press, right? So they're printing all these one-pagers going out. And basically, it starts the Sons of Liberty. And so the whole concept of taxation without representation takes on across the country. And so now we've got this idea of you can't tax us. Remember John Locke, remember Montesquieu, they said that you don't have the authority to tax us unless we give you permission through our elected representative government, the House, the Parliament, to tax us without our say-so, without our permission, without our consent. And so you have this clash now between the authority of King George versus the lack of representation among the colonists. So all of a sudden, the colonists are kind of up in arms. And so starting in 1768-ish, you start seeing all these little bitty things happening that are really anti-British, and all these notes, papers that are being hung on lampposts throughout the New England, from Virginia up to New England, about the Sons of Liberty and how they want their independence, and they want to be have representation if they're going to be taxed, or no representation. Well, now remember, the British Army left behind all of their weapons, cannons, powder, balls, and everything else. Somebody gets the bright idea, wait a minute, those colonists can use all of those weapons we left behind for their defense against us, because it sounds like they are wanting a revolution. And so we need to go take those away from them. So word came out that the British regular army was going to begin confiscating weapons. Concept of the Second Amendment comes in here, that every person has a right to, and it doesn't say firearm, okay? It says right to bear arms, because what were the primary forms of defense at that time? Well, you may have had a musket, you may have had a flintlock pistol, but your primary weapons really were a tomahawk and a good knife, okay, or a bow and arrow. So the Second Amendment doesn't say firearms, it says the right to bear arms of any kind, okay? And that's where that whole concept comes from. So in 1775, on April 19th, the British began their movement, okay? And they're going to go first to Lexington and then to Concord to confiscate those cannons. And that's where we have the shot heard around the world. Now, do you notice something here? The shot heard around the world was on April 19th, 1775. The U.S. Army was formed in June 1775, and actually the Colonial Army. And then we don't have the Declaration of Independence until July of 1776, July 4th. I hope all of you remember that date. But we were basically at war with Great Britain for a year before we had the Declaration of Independence signed. And then that war would continue on until 1783 in September, when we had the Treaty of Paris. And we say it ended at the Battle of where Cornwallis was defeated. Gosh, I forget the name of it now. I want to say the Battle of Lexington, but it's not. But anyhow, Cornwallis was defeated. He surrendered, and then it took a couple years before we finally had the formal surrender in Paris in September 3rd, 1783. Then we started writing on our Constitution, and that was finally ratified in 1788. In 1789, George Washington was inaugurated as our first U.S. president. So here's some of the things we have to think about, as we're going about this. Number one, if you were caught putting one of those bills up on, they called them bills, but it was basically a one-page piece of paper saying, these are the rights of man, and they would nail them to a lamppost in the city. If you got caught doing that, you were arrested, okay, because you didn't have the right to speech. You didn't want to be a member of the Church of England. You didn't want to be forced to tithe to the Church of England. So that's why in the First Amendment, we have the freedom of religion. Then, of course, you had the Boston Massacre. So one of the other things they wanted to make sure we had as people was the right to assemble, and that's in the First Amendment. So you've got all these rights that are guaranteed to you in the First Amendment. Those are protected by the Second Amendment, and the Second Amendment says, let's go ahead and just read it. There's a preamble to it as well that hangs up a lot of people, but a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So who was the militia? It was all able-bodied men. So in other words, all able-bodied men in the colonies had a right to bear arms. So knife, tomahawk, bow and arrow, musket, pistol, flintlock pistol, whatever weapon you chose, but that was the arm of your choice. So, you see a lot of the things that were leading up towards these things. Now, in 1803, we have another significant event around the freedom of religion concept, and that's Thomas Jefferson. On January 1st, he writes a response to the First Baptist Church of Danbury, Connecticut. The First Baptist Church of Danbury, Connecticut, felt that they were being prosecuted or persecuted by another religious organization, and that they were not being given the freedom that they were entitled to under the First Amendment or by the state. So they petitioned to President Thomas Jefferson and said, hey, these guys are bullying us, and we want you to stop them. They should not be able to bully us. So then Thomas Jefferson writes back with what today is one of the most misquoted quotes that there is in the history of the United States. And he said that there is an impenetrable wall of separation between the church and the state. And the state has no authorized ability to interfere with the conduct of religion. Okay. So basically, the president said, you want freedom of religion? You got it. Okay. Which means that I, as the government, cannot interfere with your religion or with your qualms with another religion. So the United States is going to stay out of any of these internecine church things that are going on. You guys have got to work that out yourselves. You have freedom to do that. That's your responsibility. The government's going to back off. But let's go back and take a look at the opposite of that. Okay. The opposite of that is, where were most of the revolutionary meetings conducted during the Revolutionary War? They were conducted in churches, most of them led by the ministers. Why? Because less than 5% of the population could read during the time of the revolution. So if there was something that needed to be read, where were you going to read it? Usually the clergy were the ones who were taught to read, because they were expected to read the Bible. They were expected to do all these other things, communicate, write letters, and all that kinds of stuff. So it was two groups of people, basically, who had the education, the ability to read and write. And that was going to be the clergy, and that was going to be basically what you might call CEOs today, or the bourgeois class, for lack of a better word. Everybody else didn't know how to read, so they were totally dependent upon those two reading it to them and interpreting it for them. So that means that the churches were one of the primary fundamental influencers of the revolutionary period here in the United States. So the churches were not weren't looked upon as being detrimental to the government. They were looked upon as being supportive of the government. So, when we say that there's a separation of church and state, we misunderstand the consequence or the circumstances under which that was written. It was written to keep the government out of the church's business, not to keep the church out of the government's business. Now, for those of you who want to look it up, the reason that we now have the church out of the government's business, I believe it's 1963, but let me look it up. It's called the Johnson Act of I think it's 1963. Let me look it up here real quick on Google. Actually, I use DuckDuckGo. Johnson Act of 1934. I'm sorry. So the Johnson Act of 1934. No, that's not the one I want. Anyhow, LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, was going to run for Congress. And here it is. Okay, Johnson Amendment. I'm sorry. I said Johnson Act. It's the Johnson Amendment. The Johnson Amendment is a provision by the U.S. tax code since 1954 that prohibits nonprofit organizations from endorsing or opposing political candidates. Section 501c3 organizations are the most common type of nonprofit organization in the United States, ranging from charitable foundations to universities and churches. The amendment is named for then Senator Lyndon Baines Johnson of Texas, who introduced it in a preliminary draft of the law in July 1954. So why did LBJ put in the Johnson Amendment so that if you support a candidate for political office, you lose your tax-free status? You want to know why? Because he asked his church to endorse him for the Senate and they refused. So he said, I'll teach you a lesson. If you won't endorse me, when I get the authority, you won't endorse anybody. And so since 1954, that has been what we've done. Churches are not allowed to endorse political candidates or to support one side or the other, theoretically, in any kind of a political discussion. So what are the results of 1776? What are the results of Montesquieu, of Jean Locke, of Darby, and the others? Well, they're the basic tenets, the philosophical tenets of the 18th century that prevailed, that are included into our Constitution. Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton did a great job of including these. I strongly recommend get a copy of the Federalist Papers. It's John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, writing basically about their intentions behind each one of the articles in the Constitution, as well as the amendments. But the key concepts they wanted were personal liberty, equality, popular consent. Government draws its power from the people. Popular sovereignty. The ultimate authority in a society rests with the people, hence, we the people. Individualism, rugged individualism. The individual takes priority over the group. Religions, faith, morality, religious freedom. Our Constitution was designed so that only a moral and religious person would be able to wholly understand and apply it. That's what John Adams said. To establish justice, common set of laws applicable to all, to ensure domestic tranquility. That's even mentioned in the preamble. Provide for common defense, included in the preamble. Establish justice is included in the preamble. Promote the general welfare, included in the preamble. And secure the blessings of liberty, which is included in the preamble of the Constitution as well. So that takes us up to basically 1785. And so now what we'll do is for the next couple of weeks, we'll be looking at the 200 questions that you have to answer to become a U.S. citizen if you are coming to the U.S. for the first time from another country. So let me see if I can catch up with some of your comments and leave it open to questions for you and maybe even some discussion among you. Isn't this some interesting poo-poo? I mean, this is, hello, Texas Redleg. So I've invited Texas Redleg to be with me starting next Tuesday. Next Tuesday, we're going to be starting the book review of the book on situational awareness. So you've got 1 week to order this and read it. Next Tuesday, we're going to do this. Tomorrow night, we're going to catch up because I had the funeral and I wasn't here to do the, I think it's right here. No, that's Blue Dawn. I wasn't able to do, oh, there it is. I wasn't able to do the Borrowed World. I missed that night. I'm sorry. So tomorrow night, we're going to make up the Borrowed World, which was our fiction book for last month. But starting a week from tomorrow, we're going to start doing the situational awareness. And Texas Redleg has been posting a lot about situational awareness. So I've invited him to come on as a co-host and help me discuss that. And if he's here, then we'll see what happens. So Christina, the Hebrew, here's a problem with the Hebrew Bible. Okay, so you can get the Hebrew Bible. I've got a copy of it. There are two different versions of it. Okay, so the first one, basically, the one that was used during Jesus's time, had 6 books in it. That and here's how you can remember this. It's called the Big Purple Grape. So if you can think of a big purple grape, so A, Assyria, B, big, Babylon, P, purple, Persia, G, Greece, R in grape, Romans. So the 5 major occupying countries of Israel were Assyria, Persia, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and then Rome. And so during the Greek occupation of Israel, they prohibited things to be written in Hebrew. They only allowed the Greek language to be used. And that's why you have the language of trade at that time later becomes Koine, which is a form of Greek. And most people don't realize, as a matter of fact, that Cleopatra was a granddaughter, not of the pharaohs. She was a granddaughter of one of the generals of Alexander the Great, because he conquered Egypt. And so they put their own people in charge. They demanded their own language be done. So there's a period of about 200 years where all of Hebrew history was written in Greek and not in Hebrew. In 100 AD, so 100 years after Christ, when the Jewish rabbis, and they call it canonizing, when they canonized the Jewish works of literature in their Old Testament, they threw out anything that was not written in Greek. So you have, it's not written in Hebrew. So you have the 6 books that were written in Greek, Maccabees and a couple others. But when they threw those books out, what they forget is they've got 2 of their major holidays were during the Maccabean period. So, the Feast of Lights, Hanukkah, and I forget what the other one is. But anyhow, those were in during the Maccabean period. And so they basically threw those out because they said they were written in Greek, not in Hebrew. And then, of course, you've got the New Testament, which was written primarily in Aramaic and in Hebrew and Greek. A little bit in Latin, but not much. Most of it's in Hebrew and Greek. Although later it was all of it, both the Hebrew, the Hebrew, the Aramaic, the Greek, were all translated into the Latin Vulgate. And so the Latin Vulgate is the Bible that was canonized by the Catholic Church in 425 AD. So they included those 6 books of the Old Testament because they said those 6 books would have been quoted by Jesus when he walked the earth, instead of being thrown out, 100 years later. So they said because he would have quoted those and he honored the traditions of those 6 books, they decided to keep them in as part of the canon. So, there are plenty of cross-reference. I have several cross-reference Bibles where you can look at it in 4 different languages as you study the Bible. But you can get those. They are very readily available. Hello, Sandy. Welcome. Hello, Mindfully Crocheted. Welcome. Mindfully Crocheted was just over on David Lynn Preppers. And so she's joining us over here. Do me a favor, and if you would, subscribe to her. Let me see if I can't get... I can't do it. If one of my moderators would post her link, I would greatly appreciate it. She needs a little bit more as far as support behind her channel. Stray Kitten, welcome. I think that since Elon Musk bought Twitter, they've changed their policies. I know I got kicked off of Twitter. And the reason I got kicked off of Twitter is because I had the hashtag where we go one, we go all. And so anybody who had that hashtag was basically kicked off Twitter. So once Elon Musk bought it, I was able to get back on. But certainly you have to be mindful of Facebook and YouTube. Now, here's another one of those things that gets us back into civics, okay? What does the Constitution guarantee, okay? So if somebody comes into your house and says, God, you look ugly, you smell like poo-poo, your politics suck, you're the most ignorant person I've ever met in my life, do you have a right to tell that person, get out of my house, okay? I don't need you in my house telling me those things. You're on private property. What you do in your house are your rules for people who are in your house. So there's a difference between private property and government entities. The Constitution protects us from government, not from private entities. So when we say freedom of speech, we cannot be arrested by the government for freedom of speech. But if I go into your house and start insulting you, you have every right to kick me out. Twitter, YouTube, Facebook are private communications methods. And as such, the owners of those communications have the right to dictate what people can and cannot say on their property. If you don't like it, what the Constitution says is go form your own, where you can set the, if you don't like the rules I have in my house, go build your own house. Okay. So that's something that we quite often get confused, and why I think it's important that we have an understanding of basic civics in US government is we quite often get confused as to when those rights apply and when those rights don't apply. Okay. So, no, private organizations, private entities do have the right to control what's said on them. Now, as if they declare themselves to be a press publication, a news organization, then they have freedom to even create the truth. So that's another one of those guarantees protected by the First Amendment. Yeah, churches typically nowadays don't discuss politics at all, especially with the country as divided as it is. If you did, somebody's going to turn them in, and the church will lose their 501c3 status, and that's the end of most churches. I think that praying for your nation is completely acceptable. That's not pitting one candidate or one philosophy over the other. Um, well, and also maybe we should allow freedom of speech. Remember, that's that First Amendment. So which takes priority? The First Amendment guaranteeing everybody freedom of speech in politics, or the Johnson Amendment that says, hey, if you won't endorse me for Congress, I'll take away your right to endorse anybody. To me, the Constitution takes precedence over a wicked politician's desires to get even with somebody for not selecting him as their representative. Let me catch up here with. Thank you, Lisa B. That's so great of you. Now, I just want to make sure you understand. Anytime I receive a donation, 30%, one third of my donations go to what's called the county food bank. Here in Williamson County, it's called the Caring Place, and then I am a member of St. Vincent de Paul, which is the Catholic Charities organization. So one third of my income goes to St. Vincent de Paul. And that's so that we can help our neighbors who are having problem meeting rent or electricity bills or anything like that. And we also, try to provide them with a little bit of Thanksgiving and Christmas. So 2/3 of anything I get on this channel, regardless of how I get it, automatically goes to people who need it far more than I do. So thank you very much for supporting that. I greatly, greatly appreciate that. Thank you, Little Lone Prepper. Well, thank you, Mindfully Crocheted. Mark Goodwin. What kind of books does he write? I'll have to look that up. Thank you, Christina Green. Yeah, I think it's a great topic as well. So next week, what we'll do is we'll start with the first 10 of the study book for questions that are asked of new people trying to become a U.S. citizen, and see what happens there. So Diana 2 asks, what about the New Mexico governor? So the Supreme Court has said that the right to bear arms cannot be restricted. Okay. And that's a fairly recent decision. It came down from the U.S. Supreme Court. Um, and so what has happened is Albuquerque has just gone crazy as far as gun violence. So the New Mexico governor says that for the next 30 days, she is banning open and concealed carry of any firearm inside the city limits of Albuquerque, which is directly in contravention to both the Second Amendment and to the Supreme Court decision saying that the Second Amendment is supreme. And so there are a bunch of people who want to impeach her on the fact that she is encroaching on their Second Amendment rights. I don't know where we'll go with this. I can say that, yes, it is an encroachment on the Second Amendment. That is for certain. Oh, wow. Soy processing, corn and processing down. Golly, two of our major components in most of our processed foods. Unbelievable. If you haven't read it, I'll try to put the link up. Unrestricted Warfare by the two Chinese colonels of the People's Liberation Army Navy. And they say that we won't know that we are being taken down because there'll be so many little points of things going on, things happening, that we won't be able to put we won't be able to connect the dots. I'm connecting the dots. Now, the first dot I'm going to connect for you is the fact that approximately 30,000 Chinese, single, unaccompanied males, military age, nice haircuts, nice clothing, no dirty shoes like they've been walking across the desert, have crossed the southern border. Where are they now? What are they doing? They just found a cough laboratory run by the Chinese in the vicinity of LA. So we've got these underground laboratories that are going on. We've got all these suspicious fires, attacks on substations, derailments, you name it. To me, that's fifth generation warfare to a T. I think we are already in World War III. I think that these basically 5 divisions worth of infantry that the Chinese have gotten into our country because of our wide open southern border, I think you had better remain armed at all times and keep your wits about you and keep your eyes open at what's going on around you at all times, because I think that's where it's going to start. Don't worry about nukes. What you got to worry about is those crazy guys that are in the country already, 30,000 of them at least. Okay. So I just ordered, and they came in today. I ordered 2 more new books. One of them, oh gosh, I can't wait to take a pain pill and go to bed. My back is really acting up today. Oh, I got to show you. I can't get to it. I was going to show you my cane. My cane now has blue paint on it. I was in the crosswalk, leaving HEB, going to my pickup in the handicapped parking space, and a lady was too busy talking on her cell phone to see me in the crosswalk. So my cane now has blue paint on it where she hit it as she drove by. Thank God I stopped. 3 more inches, I would have been missing my right leg. Unbelievable. Father Mike Schmitz, I'm doing his catechism in a year. Last year we did Bible in a year. This year we're doing catechism in a year. But he strongly recommended this book, Why Johnny Can't Tell Right from Wrong. And it's basically stories about we aren't leading our children with role models anymore. We're basically, our babysitters used to be television. Now it's gone to video games. There's all these things that are going on. We no longer give the stories, whether it be religious-based or whether it be national-based or whatever. We don't give epic hero examples for our children to try to emulate. And so that's the whole thing that William Kirkpatrick is talking about in that book. And then This book was also recommended to the Sovereign Individual, so I'll start those, as if I don't have enough books to read right now. But anyhow, so yes, we have. Yes, we have. And it does not need to be rewritten. It just needs to be reread. And people need to read it for what it actually says. And that's why I think it's important that we understand what did they want it to mean when they wrote it. So understanding Locke and Montesquieu and John Jay and all these other people and these philosophies that were happening at the time, how does that come over to today? And there are those, if you ask people what kind of a government we have, they would tell you a democracy. And nowhere in the Declaration of Independence or in the Constitution does the word democracy appear. As a matter of fact, there's a famous quotation that a woman asked Benjamin Franklin. Asked Benjamin Franklin when they left the constitutional writings there in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, and the woman said, "What kind of a government have you given us? Have you given us a monarchy?" He says, "No, ma'am, I've given you a republic if you have the sense to keep it." And, so that's basically, we have a republic, a representative democracy, whereas democracy is, the best way to define democracy is mob rule. So as long as 51% say that that's what they want, that's what they get. Good talk, Lee. Could you talk about Central and South America with our involvement? No, I can't. I don't know enough to where I would, and I would hate to try to guess. I can try to research that. Maybe if you send me an email, give me some ideas on what it is you want to talk about, and let me do some research. But right now, I don't know enough about Central and South America. I was a Russian analyst, so I did analysis of 2 different countries. So the first 5 years, I was an Indonesian analyst, and then for the next 16 years, I was a Soviet analyst. So all of my intelligence work was against either the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, or against Indonesia, Malaysia. But other than that, no. I would hate to get into an area that I know very, very little about, and there's no way I could even fool one person, let alone a large number of people. Yeah, the Chinese, I agree. Quiet invading. How is the ATF able to make rules or laws on firearms? Is that against the Second Amendment? Yes, it is. But that's all part of that. What we have done, and we'll get into this as we get further into it. So Congress has lawmaking authority. Okay, when they write a bill, they will write the bill in such a way that they will give rulemaking authority, as long as it's published in the federal journals. They'll give rulemaking authority to the executive branch agency that has jurisdiction over that. So theoretically, what the Constitution says is, if we're going to have an EPA law, that law should be written by Congress. If we're going to have a firearms law, that law should be written by Congress. But Congress says, you know what, we're too busy. So we're going to write this law that says we're subordinating, or we are delegating our responsibility, our role in writing that law over to the executive branch. Okay. So then the executive branch, the ATF, the FBI, and those guys, they write their own rules. Okay. Without any oversight by Congress. So when Congress finally gets into it, like we're seeing right now, the weaponization of the Department of Justice and the FBI, Congress is trying to look into it, but they've had rulemaking authority for so long. They've even created rules that Congress never objected to, that they don't have to show anything to Congress. So, I mean, it's gone crazy. It's really gotten crazy. We need basically to start all over again and just reread the documents and follow them from the very beginning. Here's a very interesting one. My daughter and her husband just moved to New Jersey, and he is native Mexican American, fourth generation. So his grandfather and his great grandfather both speak Spanish. His father doesn't, he doesn't. And so they, of course, being Texans, my son-in-law and my daughter wanted Mexican food. And in New Jersey, that's kind of hard to find. So they said, go to this one city, but it's not a good place to go to. So they went to the city to get Mexican food, and they saw him and started speaking to him in Spanish. He couldn't answer him. I speak more Spanish than my Mexican son-in-law does. And but they thought that was very funny. But anyhow, yeah, trying to have good Mexican food. One of our rules here in Texas is don't eat any Mexican food north of the Red River, west of El Paso, or east of Arkansas. Have a wonderful evening and dinner, Mindfully Crocheted. Okay, so we're at 1 hour and 5 minutes. So golly. Did you all, Triple G Farms, thank you so much. You're a wonderful guy. Did you all get anything out of this evening? Was it helpful to understand where the mindsets of the colonists, where the mindsets of the colonialists, where the mindsets of the revolutionaries were at the time that they sought independence from England? You also need to take a look at the prevailing religion inside each state, because each state basically had a state religion. You had the Methodists, you had the Baptists, you had the Puritans, the Pilgrims, of course, Maryland was the Catholics. And so you've got all these different religions, and they kind of all focused in specific areas. And then, of course, that's going to change as they start moving westward. You're going to see modern innovations that come in, and modify the American experience. So you've got, the Church of Christ and the Jehovah's Witnesses and all these other different forms of the Protestant religion, along with the Mormon Church, popping up, and all of these then also become quite contentious in and among each other as well. So you've got, the Mormons, unfortunately, were very prosecuted by a lot of the other Christian religions in the area. Well, thank you, Scott. Appreciate you being here. And let me see, Josie, I'm sorry. Yes, there is, and it's called the Hillman College, I believe. But yes, they do a fantastic job. I'll see if I can't find that and put it in a link for the show notes. Wow, Holly, you'll have to email me the name of that, and I'll send it to my daughter. Yeah, Josie, please do that. We'll make sure we announce that. So thank you very much for sharing that. So remember, number 6, 24, 25, 26, the Lord be with you. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you. The Lord look upon you kindly and grant you peace. And remember that we're all in this together so we can come out the other side together. Please be kind, polite, respectful to each other, because togetherness is the key. Let me see. I got two more coming in. So here's another one, Christina. Here's one I want to challenge you. For example, go to the book of Numbers. Okay, don't look at the numbers because the numbers for the verses are artificial. We put those did not exist until the Geneva Bible in 1500s. Okay, and so, but all that was just literary text. So what I would encourage you to do is write down each "thou shalt nots" in Numbers for the 10 Commandments. And what you're going to find is there's actually 14, not 10. So some of them have been kind of scrunched together. Now, different religions give other religions a hard time on how they scrunch them together. If you scrunch number 1 and 2 into number 1, and then number 3 becomes number 2, and all the way down, and then you scrunch number 14 and 13 together to make number 10. Different religions, different forms of Protestantism do it different ways. But I would encourage you, look at those 10 commandments. What you're going to really find is there's probably really 14 of them. If you look at them without the numbers of the paragraph. Also, if you look at the total number of Jewish commandments, there's 365. And a lot of those require the death penalty. So it's really interesting. Yeah, biblical history is really, really interesting. Okay, take care, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. Please have a very safe week. Do me a favor. Remember those who perished 22 years ago today. Most of them innocents, but gosh, let me tell you, put a special place in your heart for those who ran up the stairs, running into the flames of danger for the sole purpose of saving another human being's life. You've got to give those guys the honor, the recognition, the appreciation for their courage, their determination, and their love of their fellow man. So if nothing else, from this day on September 11th, 2023, remember, love those who love their fellow man so much that they sacrifice their lives for them. So take care, everybody. Have a great evening. Bye-bye. If I can find a way to get up here and get to end stream. There we go. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.